Hey everyone, happy Thursday. Hope you're having a good day. And today we are going to talk about metal mining in ancient Africa. Very similarly to what the Wakandans did in Black Panther, they received vibranium, which was a stone, a metal, and they were able to create so many different uses for it within their country and their kingdom. And that's not something that only they were able to do. Many other kingdoms and communities in ancient Africa were able to do that sustainably. So today we're going to discuss that and go forward with some new information on stuff that we already see and may have access to. All right, so today, metals in ancient Africa. So today's lesson, we're really talking about metallurgy. Metallurgy is defined as the art and science of extracting metals from ores and modifying those metals for use. This has been practiced in Africa since ancient times, and those who did practice it, the blacksmiths, the miners, they were valued members of their community. They were so valued that invading armies would make special efforts and attempts to kidnap them because they would want them to build their cities and help them create their weapons in the future. So, highly prized skill set. All right. So, we're going to talking about steel. Um, a lot of historians credit um, steelmaking to William Kelly of Eddyville, Kentucky. In 1847, he figured that blowing oxygen on iron could create carbon steel. And they called this process converter steel because it converts iron to steel. And this was pretty major at the time. We started seeing steamboats pop up again and gain popularity during that period. They needed structured steel to be made. 9 years later, the Englishman Henry Bessemer reinvented Kelly's method. And today we talk about the Bessemer process when making carbon steel. A lot of engineers, if anyone's interested in engineering, they still refer to this process as the Bessemer method to this day. But neither of those people really created carbon steel. It was created in the East African nation of Tanzania. The Haya people have been making it for over 2,000 years. Um, so, Haya people of Tanzania, they began creating steel around 100 AD. Elders were usually in charge of making the metal from mud and grass to produce carbon. And the carbon was then fused with iron over an open furnace to produce that steel. They would become welders and they would use metal for anything needed. But before that time, Chinese people had invented quench hardened steel, which is a different type of steel, and that was during 403 to 221 BC. But even though that was a different type of steel, it was not carbon steel. So as a resource, carbon steel is inherently African. Now, the Haya people, they made their steel in a kiln. It's kind of shaped like an upside down cone with it was about 5 feet high. And y'all may have seen a kiln before. If you watch someone make ceramics, or if you ever watched a video on YouTube with someone blowing glass, that's what the kiln is. They made the cone and then they would make the bed of grass beneath it, and they would use that termite mounds because it would harden and creating the kiln. And termite clay was really the best refractory material for use at the time. They would fill the bed of the kiln with swamp reeds, and then they would put charcoal and iron ore above the reeds, and it would cook all in there. Now, the key to the higher process was that it was operating at a high temperature. And you have to think, of course, because we're using this very heavy, dense type of clay, which is the termite mounds, and we're using it and we're compacting all of that heat in this one area. 8 men would see or sit around the kiln, and they would use hand bellows to pump air into there so they would oxygenate it, and the air would flow through the fire and through the clay and the kiln, and the heated air would blast the charcoal itself. The result was hotter than anything known in Europe during that time. It was thousands of degrees hotter. Now, how do we know that they did this? Well, in 1969, anthropologist Peter Schmidt went to Tanzania for something completely different. He was digging around and saw one of the furnaces, so he asked them about it, like, "Hey, what's that?" And they explained to him that they used to use them, but they couldn't remember what for because they had stopped making steel for so long. So he realized, you know what, I'm going to speak to some of the elder people, the elders. Maybe they might remember. And they remembered that when they were children, they saw other people who were older than them use it to make steel, but they didn't anymore because at that time, cheaper European steel was more popular and it made its way to Africa, and it kind of put the higher people out of business as far as the business of trading the carbon steel by the early 20th century. So since they couldn't really trade it, they stopped making it and they just lost those traditions down the line. He asked if anyone could remember working on it, but they didn't learn because, you stop doing something for a while, you kind of forget. And no one taught them how to do it because those generations just lost it. But they tried to figure it out and they tried to see what they could do and really remember. And one thing that they did do is they did realize that they could figure it out. They also wanted to see and realize that one of the things that they could do is that these people have been doing it for 2,000 years. And they realized that this was something that was so old that all you really needed to do was really think and really remember. And they remembered it and said, we've been doing this for centuries, for millennia. So, all right, let's go to the next slide. Now, one thing that's really cool about this one is that the Benin bronze. Metallurgy wasn't just in Tanzania, which is East Africa, of course. It happened all over the continent. In the West African kingdom of Benin, which is not, I actually learned for this lesson, it's not the country of Benin. It was in modern day Nigeria. So it's interesting to see how things have changed. And it actually never touched Benin either. So it was the whole time in modern day Nigeria. This kingdom was called the Edo Kingdom. There were crafters and metal guilds who they worked with wood, ivory, leather, and other natural resources that were to better their environment. And they developed what is known around the world as Benin bronze. You've probably seen these things if you've ever been to a museum or if you ever want to check it out. If you haven't seen them, check it out on National Geographic's website. They have some really great pictures of some of the artwork, but they would craft statues and busts of gods and leaders using brass. And I put a picture here today, and you can see it's very intricate, very ornate. It's in detailed, very detailed to say that it is a metal. So, you know how we discussed that in some communities, they did quite a bit of trading with other countries and kingdoms. In my research, I found out that the Edo Kingdom would trade for metal rings with European nations, and they turned those rings like they're big, think big, really big bangles, sometimes pretty large. Um, and they would turn these rings into this art here. And these rings were made from those brass alloys. Now, what is it? One thing I did learn too is that even though it's called the Benin bronze, it's not bronze at all. It's brass. So people who refer to it, they say Benin bronze. It's brass. It's brass. That's exactly what it's made. It doesn't. They don't really have bronze in them. But what's really interesting about current Benin bronzes is that a lot of the leaders that are still in Nigeria to this day, people who are descendants of the Edo Kingdom, they are appealing to a lot of museums around the world to give back the bronzes that are in their museums, because they say that this is our history. We want our history to be here. We can loan them out to you, but these were actually ours and they were taken without our permission. So there is a lot of conversation between Nigerian government and museums around the world on what they can do to get these bronzes back. And they've been having a back and forth with the British Museum for years. But as you can see here, these works are really beautiful. They're very detailed, very descriptive. And just think that somebody decided that they can make metal out of this kind of art. I mean, excuse me, art out of this kind of metal. So really, really cool to see. Now, I found conflicting reports on the origins of copper, but as far as its connection to Africa, but I believe that that is a testament of how far back that this specific metal goes on the continent. So even when I see that some places say, oh, it came from Egypt, oh, it came from Mali, oh, it came from Morocco, I see three countries that are not super far away from one another. So it could be from all of them, or it could be from one specific country. And then we know that some tribes moved, some kingdoms expanded, some shrank. So it could have navigated itself all over Africa. So, I think that that's pretty cool itself. Now, some archaeologists, they found copper mines in Mali and Morocco, but it's challenging to say where it was seen or used first. But I did find an extensive amount of work regarding its use in ancient Egypt. So that's what we'll talk about today, copper's use in ancient Egypt. Now, copper was one of the basic metals used there, foundational. Everyone loved copper. One of the reasons why ancient Egyptians loved copper, and it was one because it was just as important as iron. They realized, especially in the metal workers, they realized that it was easier to shape if it was heated before hammering. So, and they call that process tempering. So you could make a weapon or a tool that was as strong as iron, but if you wanted to heat it up and, make it a little bit more flexible, you could. Iron wasn't as flexible. So you get all the benefits of iron without the drawbacks of it. So they loved it for that reason. Archaeologists even found that there were copper tools used to help build made and used to help build pyramids. Copper was always also used to make jewelry and art because of the beautiful bronze color. They made rings, bangles, chains, necklaces, ornaments. Even back then, the color and the luster of jewelry was something that people really liked because it added a little flair. And also, it was used to create hair ornaments. So when I was a little girl, I used to love when my mom would put beads in my hair. Because I used to love shaking it, and you hear the swish 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 sound of the beads. But they would use ancient Egyptians would put beads in their hair that were made of copper. Also, too, I one of the things that kind of reminds me of the same type of aesthetic as far as like hair designs is that for some of you, when you have like family members or friends or even yourself go to the beauty supply store and they have those little coils, those gold things that you can kind of put around your braids, and you put them in your hair for like a little hair design or hair barrette, and they sell them gold in the beauty supply. Ancient Egyptians wore something very similar, so it's nice to kind of see that still to this day. I sometimes put those in my braids still because I like the designs, and sometimes it adds a little flair. um, but even if you didn't want to use rings or jewelry or hair designs, hair ornaments, some people were able to use copper to decorate their weapons and make their weapons a little bit more ornate. They would say, okay, if we have a knife, they would take some copper wire and then wrap it around the knife just to add a little shine, add a little flair. Some people used embellish their shields with copper as well. And also, the ancient Egyptians used copper for practical purposes, such as building water pipes, because they had very functioning aqueducts and plumbing systems. Many examples of copper craft work in ancient Egypt was also used in tombs and the tomb management. Most of the surviving relics of tombs are made of copper, and ancient Egyptians are commonly credited with inventing the lost wax metal of casting. Um, what they would do is create a mold with beeswax, and they would let that mold harden into the shape of whatever they wanted to. Think of a like a vase or something, if someone wanted to make a vase. So they would create the shape of the vase with the beeswax, and they would let that harden. And then what they would do at the end is that they would take that copper that they've warmed up and pour it all over the cast, so that when it hardened, you just peel the beeswax off, and then now you have this copper, I guess, design or shape of whatever you use the beeswax of it for it to be. So they really utilized that a lot when it came to the tombs and the mummification process of things, building a lot of things for people who just enjoyed copper, loved the shine, loved the color. So really cool, interesting things to think about. Just how much we see copper all over the continent. All right. So, final thoughts today. I mean, I know many of us have seen Black Panther films. If not, that's okay. But if you haven't, we learned a lot about how they were able to retool and repurpose vibranium for the needs of their country. And many of these people were able to use steel, carbon steel, the bronzes, or Binion bronze, and copper to better their living situations and the ways that they wanted to affect their communities as well. So, a lot of times people are presented with one thing and they are able to use their skill set and their um, knowledge about something and knowledge about mining it to create it into something else. So that's something that I know a lot of us still do to this day. We take one thing, one tool, one resource, and turn it into something that is so much better, and we can elevate it. So think about that, and I hope everyone has an amazing day and enjoy the rest of your evening. Bye.